She stood at the end of the auction line, barefoot, wrists bound, a sack tied over her head like shame. No name, no past, just a price tag pinned to her dress. $5. The auctioneer said she didn't talk, didn't cry, didn't fight. Men whispered she was cursed. Others joked she was disfigured. One man stepped forward, not because he wanted a bride, but because something about her stillness felt like a memory. He paid $5, and the moment they were alone, she whispered his name, the one he hadn't heard in 20 years. The sun was cruel that day, settling low over the dust of the clearing, where men gathered like vultures around a rusted wagon-turned auction block. The preacher's voice cracked from the heat, but still he read names off a list like a man trying to pretend they weren't people. The lost girl didn't have a name, just a sack over her head. Final offering, the preacher said, more shame than scripture in his tone. Untouched, silent, $5 or she goes back to the cage. The men shifted. Some spat. Some laughed. She even got a face under there, someone called out. Don't matter. Ain't got a tongue, another replied. But she stood there, barefoot, wrists tied in front of her with frayed rope, the sack cinched just above her shoulders. Still as bone. Still as forgiveness. Dawson Creed hadn't meant to come. He'd only ridden into town for wire and oil. But something in the air had changed when she stepped onto that crate, something that reached down into his gut like a string yanked tight. He didn't know her. Couldn't. And yet, $5 left his hand before his brain caught up. The crowd went quiet. Sold, the preacher said, almost relieved. They didn't clap. They didn't speak. They just watched. Dawson didn't look at them. He stepped forward, took the girl by the arm, and walked her past the stairs, past the horses, past the whispering women who turned their children's faces away. She never stumbled, never paused. Her breathing was steady. She followed like she already knew where they were going. They didn't speak on the ride back. The trail was long, barren pines, ash-colored sky, and wind that kept threatening rain but never delivered. Dawson's cabin sat against a cliff's edge where the land dropped off like a broken tooth, surrounded by miles of nothing but silence. He tied up the horse, helped her down, and guided her through the cabin door without a word. Inside, it was dark and plain. Wood floors, iron stove, a single bed, untouched since winter. She stood in the center like she'd been there before, waiting. "You want that sack off?" he asked quietly. No answer. He stepped forward, slow, careful, pulled the knot loose at the back of her neck. The burlap fell, and everything inside Dawson fell with it. She wasn't disfigured, not cursed. Her face was whole, pale, tired, and quietly beautiful in a way the world had tried hard to erase. Eyes like old ink, lips bruised from biting back something long buried. And she was crying, not loudly, just enough for her lashes to tremble. He didn't ask questions, just left her a blanket, a cup of water, and stepped outside to breathe air that didn't feel so tight. She didn't speak that night. Not when he lit the fire. Not when he offered soup. Not even when he laid out a second quilt for her on the bed and settled himself in the rucker across the room. But just before the fire burned out, in that quiet, creaking stillness between night and memory, she whispered his name. Not loud, just Dawson. His eyes snapped open. He hadn't told her his name. He sat up, looked at her. She was turned toward the wall, blanket drawn to her chin. "You know me?" he asked. Silence. He stood, crossed the floor, sat on the edge of the bed like a man sitting beside a ghost. She didn't turn. But her voice came again, barely there. "You found me too late." He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she was outside before him, hands in the basin, scrubbing her arms with icy water like she was trying to erase whatever life she'd lived before this one. "Name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, Mirren. It was unfamiliar, like a song half remembered. He wanted to ask more. Where she'd come from, how she knew him, what happened behind that sack, but she looked at him like questions might break her. So he let them sit between them. Quiet. Days passed. She didn't flinch when he walked by. Didn't cower or scream. Just watched. He'd find her brushing out his old coats, mending seams with thread from God knows where. She cooked without being told. Chopped wood without waiting. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was reclaiming something. It was on the 7th day that she stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes locked to the edge of the woods. Dawson followed her gaze. There, just beyond the tree line, stood a rider, watching. Mirren stepped back. "What is it?" he asked. Her voice, steady now. "I told him I'd wait." "Who?" She turned to him, and for the first time, Dawson saw it. Not fear, not sadness, but fire. "My husband." Dawson felt his jaw tighten. "You're married?" "Was." She paused. "Before he sold me. For debt." The words dropped like stone on wood. Dawson didn't ask anything more. Just moved to stand beside her. The rider was gone. But something had started. And Dawson knew, whatever Mirren had been waiting for, it hadn't ended with that $5. It had just begun. Mirren didn't talk much after that morning. But something shifted. She moved through the cabin like it belonged to her now, not as a guest, but as someone returning to the memory of a life she'd once hoped for. Dawson felt it too. It was in the way she swept the dust out each morning, folded his shirts like someone who'd done it before, or left a bowl of warm stew by his side after long hours in the barn. She never asked for thanks, and he never gave empty words. But something in his chest felt lighter. That night, as they sat near the fire, Dawson caught himself watching her hands, steady, careful fingers, tracing the rim of a tin cup like she was remembering something fragile. He finally asked, "How long were you with him?" She didn't look up, just said, 3 years. After my father lost everything. A man came to collect the land. He didn't want land." Dawson swallowed hard. "So your father sold you?" "No," she said. "He begged. My husband offered to pay the debt. But there was a condition." She looked at him now, eyes bare. "He put a sack on my head before the vows. Said beauty brings trouble. Said I was his investment, not his wife." Dawson clenched his jaw. Mirren noticed. "He didn't beat me," she added, as if that made it better. "He just made me disappear." Dawson couldn't speak. There was no word for what that kind of silence does to a soul. Later that night, he placed a folded blanket at the foot of her side of the bed, not because she needed it, but because it was the only way he knew how to say, "You are not invisible, hey." She didn't thank him. She just touched the corner of the quilt, like it meant more than warmth. In the weeks that followed, the air shifted. They fell into a rhythm, wordless most days, but not empty. He taught her how to ride his second mare, a gentle gray named Willow. Mirren held the reins like they were a promise. She showed him how to resew the cuffs of his shirt with twine. He didn't have the heart to tell her it scratched his wrists. He wore it anyway. At night, sometimes, he would wake to find her sitting by the window, staring out into the dark, listening. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked once. She didn't answer, just whispered, "I'm remembering how not to be afraid." One evening, a storm came in, the kind that makes windows shudder and animals cry out. They sat by the fire, both too alert to sleep. Mirren curled her feet beneath her, hair loose down her back. She looked younger in the flicker of flame. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, voice like glass in wind. Dawson stared at the flames. "I didn't know. I just couldn't let them do that to you." She tilted her head. "But you didn't even see my face." He looked at her now. "Didn't need to." That made her blink. He added, softer, "I saw the way you stood. You weren't begging. You were enduring. That's not something I could walk away from." A silence bloomed between them. Not awkward, just sacred. She didn't smile, but her fingers brushed the hem of his coat where it hung near the fire, like she needed to feel something real. That night, as the storm raged and thunder rolled like war drums, Mirren crossed the room. Her steps were quiet, but full of choice. She didn't ask. She lay beside him, fully clothed, blanket drawn to her chin, her hand close, but not touching. Dawson didn't move, but neither of them slept alone that night. In town, rumors had begun to stir. They said Dawson Creed had taken in the silent girl, the one with the sack. Some said she was a witch. Others said she was half-mad. One woman spat at the mention of her name, claiming she'd cursed her milk cow with a glance. But Dawson didn't care. He hadn't cared what people thought since the war ended, and he came back to a world that no longer felt like his. Mirren didn't ask about the town, didn't want to go. But one morning, when Dawson offered to ride in for sugar and bolts, she touched his arm. "I'll come." He blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "I need to be seen. Without the sack." So they went. The silence in the general store was thick enough to chew. Mirren stood beside Dawson, spine straight, eyes calm, her face uncovered and clean. The other women pretended to browse. One man muttered something about pity. The shopkeeper, old Mrs. Tulliver, gave a tight smile. Dawson handed her the coins. "And some of that ribbon, too." Mirren looked up, surprised. "What for?" she whispered as they left. He shrugged. "You'll figure it out." She tied the ribbon in her hair that evening, after the sun went down, not because it matched anything, but because someone had finally handed her something meant to make her visible. The peace didn't last long. That night, someone left a note under Dawson's door, burnt around the edges, ink smudged like blood. "You paid for her, but she was already mine." No signature, no threat, just truth. Dawson held it in shaking hands, rage crawling up his throat. Mirren stood behind him, arms crossed over her chest. "I told you," she said, voice flat. He never meant to let go. Dawson didn't sleep that night. The note lay on the table like a loaded pistol. Mirren didn't ask what he planned to do about it. She didn't need to. The air was different, thicker. They went about the morning like usual. He fed the horses, she chopped carrots for stew, but something invisible hung between them. Not fear exactly. But wait. By noon, Dawson had saddled both horses. "We'll ride to the edge of the ridge," he said. Mirren didn't ask why. She just nodded, tied her hair back, and slipped the small knife she always kept hidden into her boot. The ridge overlooked miles of crooked trail. No trees to hide behind, no brush thick enough to ambush from. Dawson had been coming here since he was 16. His father called it the only place on earth where the truth had nowhere to hide. They sat there for hours. Mirren didn't speak until the light began to shift. "You never asked what my real name was," she said, her voice steady. Dawson turned toward her, surprised. "I thought it was Mirren." "It is, but I wasn't born with it." She twisted the ring on her thumb. It was tarnished and cracked, more iron than silver now. "My real name was Elsabeth, but he took it when he married me. Said it was too soft. He gave me a list of names and told me to pick one that sounded forgettable." Dawson blinked. "And you picked Mirren." She gave a half smile. "It was the only name I didn't hate." They sat in silence, wind brushing their faces. "I don't care what name you go by," he said finally. "But I'm not calling you what he gave you." She looked at him, something tender and raw behind her eyes. "Then what would you call me?" He didn't hesitate. "Mine." They returned to the cabin just before dusk. A hawk circled overhead, and the horses seemed skittish. Dawson walked the perimeter twice. Nothing. No tracks. No scent of campfire or horse's neigh. But the hair on his neck wouldn't settle down. Inside, Mirren had lit the oil lamp, and set 2 bowls of stew on the table. Her hands were red from scrubbing. Her sleeves were damp. She looked like someone trying to scrub fear off with water. He didn't sit. He locked the door. "Mirren." She looked up. "If I asked you something crazy, would you trust me?" She didn't blink. "Yes." They packed before sunrise. Not much, just what fit in 2 saddlebags: flour, dried meat, a spare blanket, matches, rope, and a single book Mirren had kept hidden in the drawer, filled with pressed flowers and old lines of poetry she said she couldn't remember writing. They didn't speak of where they were going, just that it was away from whatever was creeping back toward her life, like mold after rain. But as they saddled up, Mirren paused. "We can't keep running." Dawson frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked him square in the eyes. "You're a good man. You saved me. But he doesn't care how far I go. He'll follow me because I'm not a person to him. I'm a debt." Dawson stepped closer. "Then we don't run. We make him see you're not his enemy." She touched the scar behind her ear, one he'd never asked about. "You think he doesn't already know that?" Then we remind him louder. The plan was reckless, but they didn't have much time. Dawson rode back to town alone the next day. Mirren stayed at the Ridge cabin, safe under pine and distance, with the shotgun Dawson had never let anyone touch. He returned just after dark, breath shallow, dust in his lashes, a fresh gash on his cheek. "They are watching the post road," he said. 3 men. One of them's his cousin, the one with the scar on his chin. Mirren didn't speak. She reached up and cleaned the cut with an old cloth soaked in whiskey. "Did they see you?" He shook his head. "But they'll come soon." The 3rd night, they didn't sleep. The storm outside was dry, lightning, but no rain. Mirren stood by the door, hair braided back, shotgun beside her, and Dawson sat near the hearth, loading shells by memory. He looked up at her once, asked softly, "Why didn't you fight back?" She turned toward him. Her voice wasn't angry, just true, because when you're trapped long enough, you start to think the cage is safer than the world. He nodded slowly. "But now," she gave a faint smile, "now I'd rather burn the whole world than go back." Dawn broke cold and pale, and with it came hoofbeats. Dawson stepped out first, rifle drawn, shoulders square. Mirren stayed just inside the cabin's shadow. 3 men rode into view, dirty hats, thick coats, dust-covered boots. The one in the middle had eyes like burnt wood and a grin carved into his face like it didn't know how to fade. "Creed," the man called, "didn't peg you for the wife-stealing kind." "She wasn't yours," Dawson said calmly. "Oh, she was plenty mine. Got the papers to prove it. You know how it works." "You got papers," Dawson said. "I got her word." The man laughed. "That worth $5 to you?" "No," Dawson said. "It's worth the last breath I got." The man's face changed. "She's not property," Dawson continued, louder now. "Not a ghost. Not a debt. She's a woman. And she's done hiding." And then, before anyone could blink, Mirren stepped out. No sack. No silence. Just a woman with fire in her chest. "I'm not yours," she said, voice calm. "And you can die believing that." The man flinched. But he didn't charge. Not yet. The man stared at her like he'd seen a ghost rise up from its grave, not with fear, but with anger at what it dared to become. "You forget who gave you that name," he growled, sliding down from his horse. "I never wore it," Mirren said, her voice steady. "I just waited for someone to help me take it off." His boots hit the dirt hard. The 2 other riders stayed mounted, watching, silent, loyal but uncertain. Guns at their hips, hands twitching. Dawson stepped forward, rifle raised slightly, but not aimed yet. "You lay a finger on her," he said, calm as thunder, "and you'll be spitting teeth before sundown." The man gave a slow smirk. "So this is love?" Huh? $5 well spent. Mirren moved before Dawson could. She stepped between them. No gun. No shaking. Only a woman who had waited too long to be saved, and decided, finally, to save herself. I'm not for sale, she said, loud now. Not anymore. And if you ever touch my name again, I'll bury you with it. The man's grin cracked. Big words for a girl who used to cry when the bread ran out. Big words, she said, because I finally found someone who listens when I speak. Dawson's heart thudded in his chest. Not from fear, but awe. She wasn't hiding anymore. You think he can keep you? The man barked. This one, hey. He turned to Dawson. You know what she did before I married her. She survived, Dawson said. And that's enough. The man's smile died. He reached for his revolver. Too slow. Dawson already had him in his sights. One sharp movement, and dust flew as the bullet hit the ground inches from the man's foot. Next one's not a warning, Dawson said. The horses reared. The other two men didn't move. For a long second, no one did. Then the man raised his hands. Fine, he said. You win. She's yours. But his eyes said something else. Something colder. This wasn't over. That night, Mirren stood at the basin, washing her hands in silence. Her shoulders shook, not with fear, but release. Dawson came up behind her. Are you all right? She didn't answer, just kept scrubbing, as if her past was still under her skin. He gently took the cloth from her hands. You don't have to fight anymore, he said. She looked at him, eyes shining. I know, she whispered, but I want to. They talked that night, more than they ever had. About childhood. About regrets. Mirren told him about a baby brother who died in winter, about a mother who used to braid her hair with lavender stems. She spoke softly, as if naming her memories gave them breath again. Dawson shared stories of the war, the friend who died whispering his sister's name, the letters he never sent home. Two people, broken in different corners of the world, finally meeting in the space between wounds. But morning brought something colder. The smoke came first, thin, rising just beyond the ridge. Dawson ran to the edge of the bluff, squinting. Fire. Controlled at first, then not. Too close, he said, already grabbing buckets, tools, rope. Mirren stood beside him. You think it's him? Either him, Dawson muttered, or the devil trying to finish what he started. They worked fast, soaking cloth, sealing cracks, packing what they couldn't afford to lose. By noon, the smoke was thicker. The wind carried heat like breath on the back of the neck. We need to go, Dawson said. But Mirren hesitated. Her eyes were locked on the table, on the book of pressed flowers she'd left open the night before. Go, she said. Get the horses ready. Mirren, I'll be right behind you. He didn't argue. He knew that tone now. That fire. He ran for the stables. Inside, Mirren knelt at the hearth. She opened the book, torn one page out. Just one. Pressed it flat between her palms. Then she walked to the mirror and stared at herself. No sack. No shame. Just the face of someone who had crawled through ash and still dared to bloom. She folded the page and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. Then she took the lamp oil from the shelf. She pawed a line from door to wall to window, and lit the match. Dawson saw the flames before he heard the scream. He dropped the reins and sprinted for the cabin. Mirren. The windows were glowing. Smoke curled from the roof. Mirren, he roared. Then, her silhouette at the back door, she walked through the smoke like a memory returning to life. Her face was streaked with ash, eyes wild, dress torn. She held the book tight in one hand. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking. What did you do? She didn't cry. I gave it back to him, she said. Every piece of me he thought he still owned. They rode fast, smoke behind them, fire at their heels. But the wind was kind. It changed course just enough. By nightfall, they were miles away, across the river, in a town where no one knew her name. Not yet. Dawson found a room above a grain store, paid a month's rent. They didn't speak much that night. They didn't have to. Later, as he sat by the window sharpening a blade, Mirren came up behind him. She held the page she'd torn from the book. It was a pressed flower, lavender, with one line written beneath in her own script. "You did not find me. I remembered myself when you looked at me." Dawson took the page gently. "I still don't understand why me," he whispered. Mirren knelt in front of him, hands on his knees. "Because you didn't save me like a prize. You waited until I was ready to be seen." The town of Alder Creek was smaller than most. One road, 2 stores, and a bell that only rang for fires or funerals. But for Mirren, it was the first place she chose on her own. No one there knew her story. No one asked why her eyes looked older than her age, or why she flinched at sudden laughter. They simply let her be. Dawson found work at the lumber mill. Honest labor, quiet hours. He liked it. Liked that he could come home to the sound of her humming while she chopped vegetables, or reading by the oil lamp, lips moving over poetry she once thought she'd forgotten. They didn't speak of the fire again. It had been her choice, her rebirth, and Dawson knew better than to ask a woman to revisit the ashes she'd walked through. But sometimes, when the wind was just right, he'd catch her standing still at the window, as if checking to see if the past had finally stopped following them. The ring wasn't fancy. Just silver, hammered smooth by a blacksmith who didn't ask for a name. Dawson gave it to her one night under the porch lantern. No speech. No kneeling. He simply handed her the ring and said, "If you want to keep being mine, I want the world to know it." Mirren stared at the band in her palm, her hand trembling, not with fear, but with disbelief. "Do you want to hear my vows?" she asked. He nodded. She took his hand, placed it over her heart. "I vow," she whispered, "to never wear a name I didn't choose. And I choose yours." They married behind the chapel, beneath a row of trees she picked herself. No guests, no flowers, just 2 people who had walked through fire and decided to begin again. The preacher asked her name. She smiled. Mirren Creed. She never flinched when she said it. Spring came with softness. Mirren's belly began to swell before the snow had fully melted. She said she knew it was a girl, said she could feel her spirit, calm and fierce, tucked beneath her ribs. Dawson carved a crib by hand. He didn't speak much during those months, but his actions never stopped saying "I love you." She caught him once, late at night, running his fingers over the unfinished crib rails like he was afraid they might dissipate. "I never thought I'd get to be a father," he admitted. "Never thought anyone would trust me that much." Mirren placed his hand against her stomach, felt the flutter. "She already knows who you are." The baby came on a warm night in early May. No doctors, no midwives, just Dawson's steady hands, a hot cloth, and the strength of a woman who had once stood with a sack over her head and now roared life into the world without apology. They named her Elsa Lavender Creed. Elsa, for the name taken from her. Lavender, for the flower she pressed into Dawson's hands on the night they burned the past down. Weeks later, Mirren sat in the rocker on the porch, baby on her chest, heartbeat against heartbeat. Dawson stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other brushing tiny curls from his daughter's sleeping face. Mirren watched the sky turn gold and whispered, "I used to think I'd die without being loved, that I'd leave nothing behind." Dawson leaned down, kissed her temple. "You didn't leave," he said. "You began." She looked up at him. "And now?" He smiled. "Now you're the roots of everything that matters." Sometimes, Mirren wrote letters. To no one in particular, folded neatly and buried under the roots of a wild lilac tree near their porch. Letters that began like, "To the girl still waiting in silence. To the woman who doesn't remember her name. To the one who still thinks love must be earned." and always ended the same way. You are not what was done to you. You are who you choose to become. And you are never too late to begin again. One summer day, years later, Dawson walked into the house to find Elsa, now 5, sitting on the floor, holding one of Mirren's pressed flower books open. She looked up, bright-eyed, and asked, "Papa, why are there so many flowers in Mama's book?" He sat beside her, gently took the book, and ran a finger over a page Mirren had once torn. Because he knew the answer now. She was growing a garden inside her, he said, voice rough with memory, even when the world gave her no light. Elsa thought for a moment, then whispered, "Mama is magic." Dawson smiled. "No, sweetheart, your mama is real. That's the most magical thing of all." And outside, on the porch where it all began, Mirren sat with her eyes closed, the wind in her hair, the sun on her skin, not dreaming anymore, just living. She never told him how she knew his name, and he never asked, because some answers don't need words. They just need love. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Ironwood Narratives, where every story leaves a mark.